Today's video is sponsored by Penny Dragons, Vagabond's Guide to Dalriada Kickstarter. Fantasy settings are cool, but they'd be a lot cooler with whiskey and leprechauns. Vagabond's Guide to Dalriada is your quintessential D&D 5e Celtic-inspired setting. With 4 new races, 6 new subclasses, and 15 deities, deciding on your next character is going to be almost as challenging as some of the 20-plus new monsters to include Banshees, Bodax, and the Green Knight. And that is just the tip of the Blarney Stone. Discover new locations, NPCs, lore, and whiskey. So much whiskey. Did we mention that every backer gets a free copy of the Battle of Karagarth? An adventure that pits players against the cunning of the Morrigan and the might of her undead army. Click the link in the description and back now because you don't want to miss this one. And now what you're here for. Player just doesn't accept that the villain had a good reason. Today I'm going to tell you about the session that led a player to leave the table because the villain that his character hated so much, in fact, only wanted the best for his village, the PC included. Firstly, I will introduce the main villain of the season. I don't like to call it a season, but it's better to explain. Holmec Siar Gasanim, the Mad Dwarf. Holmec is a dwarf wizard who, after acquiring an absurd amount of power, rebelled against the village leaders and began to terrorize the continent. With his powers, he froze part of the continent, turning it into an endless winter, and with his army of white dragons, made everyone in his village leave the valley. Well, that's what they say and believe. The PC, Dravel Hearthstone. Dravel was a dwarf paladin, devoted to Yondala. Well, he was raised by halflings, so it made sense, and he had sworn to take back the dwarf village from the wizard's hands. According to the character sheet, he was a young dwarf, 58 years old, from the generation born outside the village in the Frozen Valley. The chaos began about 6 centuries ago. Everything he knew about the wizard was acquired in his studies in libraries of the cities he passed through during his travels. The player. We never had any problems with him. He was a great player. He helped other players. He always carried at least 3 healers' kit. If necessary, he took an opportunity attack to help another player. However, he didn't roleplay. Any session that didn't have long battles, he was practically invisible. To encourage roleplaying, I give bonus EXP after a long rest, for the player not to be left behind, since to encourage defeating enemies, the one who gives the final blow to the enemy gains 5% EXP from the enemy as a bonus, minimum 1 EXP. The session before the wizard battle. The group finally arrived at the Frozen Valley. A blizzard made it difficult to see. The accumulated snow was waist deep for humans. The dwarf was excited. He kept talking about how he was going to plunge his axe into the wizard, rip off his head and take it to his people, giving the order to return to the village. They continued walking, nothing in sight but snow and dead trees. Occasionally they heard the roars of dragons. The scene remained the same until the ranger said, "Can I roll an investigation test?" And so the farce ended. He discovered that everything was just an illusion. They weren't suffering movement penalty, feeling cold, and the strong wind. The only part that actually had snow was at the entrance to the valley. Literally a heap of snow piled up about 100 meters long. The local climate was pleasant. A warm breeze brought with it the smell of flowers. The group didn't know what to say. The Frozen Valley was nothing more than a great illusion, and underneath it, there was a beautiful and prosperous valley. And of course, the dwarf started to not accept this, saying that this was indeed an illusion, and that the ranger had been influenced by the wizard. Of course, the local fauna didn't like the invaders, and an ancient white dragon attacked the group. The fight lasted until the end of the session. They were dying to face his first dragon and actually almost died. They had the idea of fighting and running towards the wizard's tower, and the dragon followed. It was possible to see other dragons along the way, but none of them were bothered by the battle. When they arrived at the gate of the tower, the battle really began, all fighting bravely to the death. When the dragon took its last breath, the gates of the tower opened, and at the top of the stairs stood the mage. End of session. Face to face with Holmec. The wizard asks the name of the adventurers who invaded his tower. All introduce themselves except the dwarf, who runs upstairs and hits the mage with his axe, discovering that it was nothing more than a simulacrum. "Come out, you coward! I am Dravel Hearthstone, and I will be your judge and executioner." A weak, gruff voice echoes through the hall. "I'm on the balcony of my tower. I saw you all," coughing fit with a clear throat at the end, "fighting my dragon. Take the elevator and come up here." Lights turned on, showing the way to a mining elevator that went up the hollow tower. It was something like Saruman's tower. They entered the elevator, and as they went up, through the windows and holes in the tower, they saw the landscape, the magnificent valley, but the dwarf only concentrated on one thing on the horizon, the village, where it was the only place that had no vegetation, just barren land, and that was enough for him to get even more pissed at the wizard. When they reached the top of the tower, they found a gigantic library, and on the balcony a rickety old man in a wheelchair. Holmec himself. Well, what was left of him. As soon as I finished narrating Holmec's appearance and state, Dravel wanted to attack at the exact moment, and the group held him back, since he didn't seem to pose any danger, and they wanted to find out why all that farce. When the old man started to explain why all that, every time he stopped to breathe, Dravel mentioned that he was going to kill him, which started to irritate everyone at the table to the point that other players asked him to stop. A summary of the Holmec story. He was the leader of a squad of miners in the city. This squad found an unknown crystal with magical properties. Digging deeper into the crystal, a source of unknown liquid was also found. The village almost became an important city due to the crystal trade, but Holmec stopped it by starting his act. The crystal was in fact the teeth of an abyssal creature, and the liquid was its blood. He feared that if excavations continued, the creature would wake up, so he began his act of illusion. All the spells he used were from the School of Illusionist. He didn't even deal 1d4 damage to the village. He recovered the region's white dragon population in hopes that they could stop the abyssal being. When he finished explaining, Holmec asks the group for help to prevent the abyssal from awakening, and in that, Dravel freaked out. I think that was the first time I saw someone over the age of 20 having a tantrum. In less than half an hour, he got into a fight with the group for trying to kill the old man, broke his vow with Yondala, did around 57 damage to the group, and then tore up his character sheet. After the session ended, the group began to discuss what to do, about what old Holmec said, while everyone discussed talking to the Emperor, learning more about it, and/or going to the village to meet the abyssal being. The player only said we should kill the old man. That would be the best thing to do. What's worse is that after that session, he left the group chat and didn't come back for the next sessions. With the player's departure, the other members of the group decided to make a deal with the old Holmec. He would remain in the tower, under Dravel's custody, while they would try to make deals with other cities. As I had Dravel's character sheet from a previous level, every 5 levels I usually copy the player's character sheets, and deliver the copies on new sheets, a matter of not liking the paper marked from so much writing and erasing. So he became an NPC, keeping in touch with the group, and always keeping his level equal to that of the other members. On whether it was possible to discover the hoax earlier, yes, it was possible. If you asked the older dwarves, they would say that things really started to get bad when the crystal and blood mining got even bigger. When visiting the alchemist, he would have samples of the crystal and blood, and would say they were from something alive. By asking about trade routes, it was possible to find out about people who made deliveries into the valley, and were not attacked by dragons. What would it take for them to find out who is arranging these deliveries, and receive a coat of arms that would protect against dragons? The future of Holmec is still in the hands of the players. They can use it to battle the creature, kill it, enslave it, hand it over to be condemned by the authorities. If the player comes back and decides to kill it, I won't prevent it. After all, he's alone with the old man in the tower. In the encounter, it was the players who prevented it, hence the 57 damage to the group before tearing up his sheet. Not gonna lie, if I as a player centered my backstory on a particular villain, and then the DM said he'd done literally nothing wrong, I would at least be pretty annoyed, unless the execution was absolutely god tier. Some twists don't work out, but this next story has a twist that certainly worked out. Some context. The party has in their possession a magical item called the Orb of Legions. A magical and dangerous magical artifact that gives anyone who breaks the orb the ability to mind control hundreds of people at once. They have been holding onto it to keep it out of the hands of evildoers. However, once a month, an abomination made up of all the corrupted souls of the previous users of the orb comes to reclaim it. The party has faced this abomination a couple of times now, and have decided it's time to deal with the orb properly. They did some research and found out about another magical object, called an escape cube. A small ruby cube that contains 6 layers of demiplanes. Each layer has an increasingly extreme temporal effect on the creatures and objects inside them, meaning anything on the final demiplane is essentially held in infinite stasis. The Rickroll, so all that preamble context is just to say that yesterday's session was about the party using the escape cube, and I peppered some clues into the description of the escape cube to hint at the whole thing being an elaborate prank. It was created by a bard called Tekraliski, anagram of Rick Astley, and it is currently in the possession of a dragon called Skrylaketi, another anagram of Rick Astley, on the Isle of Sawsong. SAW, Stock Aitken Waterman, the producers of Never Gonna Give You Up. To use the cube, the party needed to hold the cube and speak its command word, that would then transport them into the first layer of the cube, where they needed to find the cube again, and work out the new command word to progress to the next layer. The command words were as follows: 1, up, 2, U, 3. Give. 4. 2. 5. Going. 6. Never. Somehow, they only truly clocked on when they got to the final layer, where the cube's creator, Tech Reliski, was waiting for them. And in order to get out of the cube, they had to repeat the command words in reverse order. Conclusion? Prank your players. It's a lot of fun. Have you planned a twist that went horribly wrong? Or right? Share it with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Things D&D. Stay tuned for more Dungeons & Dragons content.